A lady's courage. Lady Marjorie of Winthorne had always been raised to fear Lord Edmund Warwick, the warlord responsible for her family's ruin. But as he lifted her veil, his expression held no cruelty, only quiet amusement. "You expected a monster," he murmured. "Tell me, my lady, am I one?" Chapter 1. The Lion's Decree. The parchment crackled in Marjorie's trembling hands, the royal seal of King Alaric a Stark, crimson stain against the creamy vellum. Each elegant stroke of the king's scribe felt like a brand, searing the words into her very soul. By order of His Royal Majesty, King Alaric of Eldoria, Lady Marjorie of House Winthorne is to be wed to Lord Edmund Warwick, Earl of Northwood, to secure peace and unity between the warring houses. Peace. Unity. Hollow words, she thought, when all she felt was a chilling dread that settled deep in her bones, heavier than any winter frost. Winthorne, her ancestral home, had always been a sanctuary, a place of rolling green hills and ancient, whispering oaks. But the whispers had turned to screams 5 years past, when Lord Warwick, the Butcher of Blackwood as he was known, had swept down from the north, laying siege to their lands, leaving a trail of fire and blood in his wake. Her father, Lord Thomas Winthorne, had fallen in that battle, his valiant spirit crushed beneath the Warwick onslaught. Her brother, Edward, only 16, had been taken prisoner, his fate unknown. And Marjorie, barely 15 summers old, had been left to pick up the shattered pieces of her family's legacy, her heart a cold, desolate wasteland. Now, at 20, she was being offered as a sacrificial lamb to the very wolf who had devoured her world. The decree felt like a betrayal, not just by the king, but by the memory of her father, by everything she held sacred. She crumpled the parchment, the sharp edges digging into her palm, drawing a thin line of blood. A fitting symbol, she thought bitterly, of the marriage to come. Lady Alara, her mother, entered the solar, her face etched with a grief that mirrored Marjorie's own, yet tempered with a steely resolve that only years of hardship could forge. "My dear," she said, her voice soft but firm, "we have no choice. This marriage is the only way to protect what remains of Winthorne, to ensure the safety of our people." Safety? Marjorie's voice was a choked whisper. "By marrying the man who slaughtered our kin? Who holds Edward captive, if he even still lives?" Alara placed a comforting hand on her daughter's arm, her touch surprisingly gentle. "We must be pragmatic, Marjorie. Warwick is a powerful man, a force to be reckoned with. By aligning ourselves with him, we gain his protection, his influence. We may even be able to negotiate for Edward's release." The thought of Edward, her mischievous, golden-haired brother, brought a fresh wave of pain. Hope, however faint, flickered within her. Could this marriage, this monstrous union, truly be the key to his freedom? "But what of honor, mother?" Marjorie pleaded. "What of loyalty to our fallen? To father?" Alara's gaze hardened. "Honor will not feed our people, Marjorie. Loyalty will not rebuild our walls. We must survive. We must endure. And sometimes, survival requires sacrifice." The weight of her words pressed down on Marjorie, suffocating her. She looked around the solar, at the familiar tapestries depicting the Winthorne lineage, at the worn, leather-bound books that held the wisdom of generations. All of it, everything she cherished, was on the brink of being swallowed by the shadow of Warwick. Days turned into weeks, each sunrise bringing her closer to the dreaded wedding day. Preparations were made, the castle bustling with activity, a macabre parody of a joyous occasion. Silks and jewels were brought forth, the vibrant colors a stark contrast to the gloom that pervaded Marjorie's heart. She moved through the motions like a ghost, her spirit numb, her body a vessel for the dictates of fate. She spent hours in the chapel, the flickering candlelight casting long, dancing shadows on the stone walls. She prayed, not for happiness, for that seemed an impossible dream, but for strength, for the courage to face the darkness that awaited her. She prayed for Edward, for his safe return. And she prayed, with a conflicted heart, for a sliver of mercy from the man she was to marry. The journey to Northwood was a blur of bleak landscapes and somber silences. The Warwick lands were a stark contrast to the gentle beauty of Winthorne. Jagged mountains pierced the sky, their peaks shrouded in mist, and dark, forbidding forests stretched as far as the eye could see. The air itself felt colder, heavier, as if laden with the weight of centuries of conflict and bloodshed. As they approached Northwood Castle, a formidable fortress of grey stone that seemed to grow out of the very rock upon which it stood, Marjorie's heart pounded in her chest like a trapped bird. The massive gates, adorned with the Warwick crest a snarling wolf's head, swung open, revealing a courtyard teeming with soldiers, their armor gleaming in the weak sunlight. A figure emerged from the castle, tall and imposing, clad in black leather and steel. Lord Edmund Warwick. Even from a distance, she could sense the power that radiated from him, the aura of a man accustomed to command, to victory. He moved with a predatory grace, his eyes, the color of a winter sky, scanning the approaching party with an intensity that made Marjorie's breath catch in her throat. He dismounted his horse, a magnificent black stallion, and approached her carriage. The air crackled with tension, the silence broken only by the jingle of harnesses and the distant caw of a raven. He reached for the carriage door, his gloved hand brushing against hers as he helped her down. His touch, surprisingly gentle, sent a shiver down her spine. She looked up, meeting his gaze for the first time. His face was not the brutal, scarred visage she had imagined. It was a strong face, handsome in a rugged way, with sharp cheekbones and a firm jaw. But it was his eyes that held her captive, eyes that seemed to see straight through her, to the fear and defiance that warred within her soul. He lifted her veil, his expression holding no cruelty, only quiet amusement. "You expected a monster," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that resonated deep within her. "Tell me, my lady, am I one?" His words, though softly spoken, hung heavy in the air, a challenge, a question that demanded an answer. She met his gaze, her own unwavering, refusing to show the fear that threatened to consume her. "Only time will tell, my lord," she replied, her voice surprisingly steady. A flicker of something respect, perhaps, crossed his features, before his expression settled back into its customary mask of impassivity. The silence was thick with things unspoken, the future as yet unwritten. Chapter 2. Whispers of Warwick. The great hall of Northwood Castle was a stark contrast to the familiar warmth of Winthorne. Massive stone walls, unadorned save for the occasional flickering torch and the imposing Warwick banners, seemed to absorb the light, casting the hall in a perpetual twilight. The air was thick with a scent of wood smoke, roasted meat, and something else, something indefinable, a primal scent of iron and leather that spoke of battles fought and won. Marjorie sat beside Lord Warwick at the high table, a silent, unwilling participant in the wedding feast. The hall was filled with his retainers, a rough, boisterous crowd of warriors and their ladies. Their laughter and chatter seemed to bounce off the stone walls, creating a cacophony that grated on Marjorie's nerves. She picked at the food on her plate, her appetite non-existent. The roasted boar, the spiced wine, the honeyed cakes all tasted like ash in her mouth. She stole glances at her husband. He ate with a hearty appetite, seemingly unfazed by the tension that crackled between them. He spoke little, responding to the toasts and jests of his men with a curt nod or a brief, humorless smile. His eyes, however, were constantly moving, observing everything, missing nothing. He was a predator, she realized, even in repose. Lady Isolde, Warwick's aunt, a woman of formidable presence and sharp, intelligent eyes, sat on his other side. She had greeted Marjorie with a cool courtesy, her words polite but lacking any genuine warmth. Marjorie sensed a deep-seated suspicion in the older woman's gaze, a wariness that bordered on hostility. "The North is a harsh land, Lady Marjorie," Isolde said, her voice cutting through the din. "It breeds strong men and women. We do not have time for the delicate sensibilities of the South." Marjorie met her gaze, refusing to be intimidated. "I am not afraid of hardship, Lady Isolde." I have known my share. Isolde's lips curled into a thin smile. Indeed. But the hardships of Winthorn are nothing compared to the trials of Northwood. Here, survival is a daily battle against the elements, against our enemies, against ourselves. Her words were a veiled warning, a reminder of Marjorie's precarious position. She was an outsider, a stranger in a hostile land, bound to a man who was both her captor and her husband. As the evening wore on, the whispers began. Marjorie caught snippets of conversations, hushed voices speaking of the Winthorn witch, the southern spy, the price of Warwick's ambition. The words, though softly spoken, were like daggers, piercing her heart. She felt the eyes of the assembled guests upon her, judging, condemning. One voice, however, rose above the whispers, a voice filled with genuine concern. Sir Callan, a young knight with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor, approached her during a lull in the festivities. He had been assigned as her personal guard, a gesture of Warwick's that she found both comforting and unsettling. "My lady," he said, bowing low, "do not let the whispers trouble you. The Northmen are a suspicious lot, slow to trust. But they are also fiercely loyal, once their trust is earned." "And how does one earn their trust, Sir Callan?" Marjorie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "By showing them your strength, my lady. By proving that you are worthy of respect. By standing your ground, even when the winds of adversity blow fierce." His words offered a glimmer of hope in the suffocating darkness. She would not cower. She would not break. She would show them, all of them, that she was not a fragile southern flower, but a woman of strength, of resilience, a woman worthy of the Winthorn name. Later that night, as she lay alone in the vast, unfamiliar bedchamber, the whispers seemed to echo in the silence. The room was cold, despite the fire that crackled in the hearth. The heavy furs on the bed offered little comfort. She felt utterly alone, isolated, surrounded by enemies. A knock on the door startled her. She sat up, clutching the covers to her chest. "Who is it?" The door opened, revealing Lord Warwick, his tall frame silhouetted against the flickering torchlight in the corridor. He entered the room, closing the door behind him. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken tension. "I came to see if you were comfortable, my lady," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "As comfortable as a prisoner can be, my lord," she replied, her voice laced with defiance. He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "You are not a prisoner, Marjorie. You are my wife." "A wife in name only," she retorted. "A pawn in your game of power." He moved closer, his presence filling the room. "Power is a necessary tool, Marjorie. It is the only way to ensure survival, to protect one's people. And what of honor, my lord? What of justice?" He stopped before her, his eyes searching hers. "Honor and justice are luxuries we cannot always afford, Marjorie. In this world, only the strong survive. And the weak are crushed beneath your heel?" she challenged, her voice trembling. He reached out, his hand brushing against her cheek, his touch surprisingly gentle. "Not always, Marjorie. Sometimes the weak surprise us. Sometimes they possess a strength that even the strong cannot match." His words, his touch, sent a shiver through her. She looked up at him, her heart pounding in her chest. The whispers faded, replaced by a different kind of fear, a fear mingled with a strange, unsettling fascination. He was her enemy, the man who had destroyed her world. Yet, in that moment, she saw something else in his eyes, a flicker of vulnerability, a hint of something more. The night held its breath, waiting. Chapter 3. A Gilded Cage. The days that followed were a strange mixture of isolation and scrutiny. Marjorie was confined to the castle walls, a gilded cage, surrounded by servants who were polite but distant, their eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. She spent her time exploring the castle, its labyrinthine corridors and echoing chambers, its hidden gardens and forgotten towers. Northwood Castle was a fortress, built for defense, not comfort. The stone walls were cold and damp, the air thick with the scent of mildew and age. Yet, there was a certain stark beauty to the place, a sense of history and power that resonated deep within Marjorie's soul. She found solace in the castle library, a vast, dusty room filled with ancient tomes and forgotten scrolls. She spent hours poring over the books, losing herself in tales of long-dead kings and queens, of heroic knights and mythical beasts. She learned more about the Warwick lineage, a family steeped in blood and conquest, their history a tapestry of war and betrayal. She read of Lord Edmund's father, a ruthless warlord who had expanded the Warwick domain through brute force, earning the fear and hatred of his enemies. She read of Edmund's mother, a northern noblewoman who had died giving birth to him, leaving him to be raised in the harsh, unforgiving world of his father. She began to understand, if not condone, the man she had married. He was a product of his environment, shaped by the brutal realities of his upbringing. He had been taught to be strong, to be ruthless, to show no weakness. Yet, she sensed a deep-seated loneliness within him, a yearning for something more than the endless cycle of violence and conquest. Sir Calin, her ever-present guard, became her unlikely confidant. He was a kind and gentle soul, a stark contrast to the hardened warriors who surrounded him. He told her stories of the North, of its wild beauty and its fierce, independent people. He taught her about the local customs, the ancient traditions, the superstitions that governed their lives. The Northmen are a proud people, my lady, he explained. They value strength and loyalty above all else. They are slow to trust, but once their trust is earned, they will defend you with their lives. He also spoke of Lord Warwick, offering a different perspective on the man who is both her husband and her captor. He is a hard man, my lady, but he is also just. He cares deeply for his people, for their welfare. He has been forced to make difficult choices that have earned him enemies, but he has always acted in what he believes to be the best interests of his people. Marjorie listened, her heart filled with a mixture of conflicting emotions. She still hated Warwick for what he had done to her family, but she could not deny the grudging respect she felt for his strength, his leadership. She saw the way his men looked up to him, the loyalty and devotion they displayed. He was a leader, a warrior, a force to be reckoned with. One evening, as she was walking in the castle gardens, she came across Lord Warwick practicing his swordsmanship. He moved with a fluid grace, his body a symphony of controlled power. The steel of his blade flashed in the fading sunlight, a deadly dance of skill and precision. She watched him, mesmerized, her heart pounding in her chest. He was a magnificent specimen of manhood, his body honed by years of training and battle. She felt a strange, unsettling attraction to him, a primal pull that both frightened and intrigued her. He sensed her presence and stopped, turning to face her. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, met hers. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken tension. "You are skilled with the blade, my lord," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. He inclined his head, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "A necessary skill in these lands, my lady. I have never held a sword," she confessed. He smiled, a rare and genuine smile that transformed his features. "Perhaps I could teach you." The offer surprised her. She had expected him to be dismissive, to treat her as a fragile, southern lady. But his offer, though unexpected, was not unwelcome. "I would be honored, my lord," she replied. And so began her lessons in the art of swordsmanship. He was a patient teacher, surprisingly gentle, correcting her form, guiding her movements. She learned quickly, her natural grace and athleticism serving her well. The physical exertion was a welcome release, a way to channel her pent-up anger and frustration. As she trained with him, she began to see a different side of him, a side that was not hidden behind the mask of the ruthless warlord. She saw his dedication, his discipline, his unwavering focus. She saw the flicker of pride in his eyes when she mastered a new move, the hint of a smile when she surprised him with her agility. She was still his prisoner, his captive bride. But the walls of her gilded cage were beginning to crumble, replaced by a strange, unsettling intimacy. She did not know it, that the walls were built by her own hand, the same hand he was training to hold a weapon. A weapon to be used against whom? The uncertainty lingered, a whisper of unease in the growing quiet of her heart. Chapter 4. The Hawk and the Dove. The relationship between Marjorie and Edmund remained a complex dance of power and subtle shifts in understanding. He was the hawk, fierce and untamed, accustomed to ruling his domain with an iron fist. She was the dove, seemingly fragile, yet possessing an inner strength that surprised even herself. Their interactions were often laced with a tension that was both unsettling and strangely exhilarating. One crisp autumn morning, Edmund invited Marjorie to join him on a hunt. She hesitated, the thought of killing a defenseless creature unsettling. But she also recognized the opportunity to spend time with him outside the confines of the castle, to see him in his element. "I have never hunted before, my lord," she confessed. "Then it is time you learned, my lady," he replied, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "The North is a land of hunters. You must learn to survive." He provided her with a riding habit of dark green velvet, a color that complemented her auburn hair and fair complexion. He also gave her a small, beautifully crafted bow and a quiver of arrows. "This belonged to my mother," he said, his voice unusually soft. She was a skilled huntress. The gesture touched Marjorie deeply. It was a sign of trust, a sharing of something personal and precious. She accepted the gift with a grateful nod, her heart filled with a strange mixture of emotions. The hunt took them deep into the Northwood Forest, a vast, ancient woodland that teemed with wildlife. The air was crisp and clean, scented with pine and damp earth. The sunlight filtered through the trees, creating dappled patterns on the forest floor. Edmund was a skilled tracker, his eyes constantly scanning the surroundings, searching for signs of game. He taught Marjorie how to read the tracks, how to listen for the sounds of the forest, how to move silently through the undergrowth. She found herself enjoying the experience, the challenge of the hunt, the beauty of the surroundings. She felt a sense of freedom, a release from the constraints of the castle. They came across a herd of deer grazing in a clearing. Edmund signaled for her to stay back, then drew his bow and took aim. The arrow flew true, striking a magnificent stag. The animal fell, its lifeblood staining the ground. Marjorie felt a pang of sadness, a sense of loss for the creature's life. But she also understood the necessity of the hunt, the cycle of life and death that govern the natural world. Edmund approached the fallen stag, his expression somber. He knelt beside the animal, placing a hand on its flank. He spoke a few words in a low voice, a prayer, perhaps, or a tribute to the creature's spirit. Marjorie watched him, her heart filled with a grudging respect. He was a hunter, a warrior, a man of the North. But he was also a man who respected the natural world, who understood the balance of life and death. As they rode back to the castle, the setting sun casting long shadows across the landscape, Edmund spoke of his plans for Northwood. He spoke of his desire to bring peace and prosperity to his lands, to improve the lives of his people. "I want to build a better future for my people, Marjorie," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "A future free from the constant threat of war, a future where our children can grow up in safety and security." His words resonated with Marjorie. She shared his desire for peace, for a better future. She began to see him not just as a conqueror, but as a leader, a man who cared deeply for his people. "I believe you, my lord," she said, her voice soft but sincere. He looked at her, his eyes searching hers. A flicker of something hope, perhaps, crossed his features. The silence stretched between them, no longer filled with tension, but with a growing understanding, a shared vision for the future. That night, as she lay in her bed, Marjorie thought about the day's events. She thought about the hunt, the beauty of the forest, the shared moments with Edmund. She thought about his vision for the future, his desire for peace. She realized that she was beginning to see him differently, to see beyond the mask of the ruthless warlord. She was beginning to see the man beneath, the man who cared for his people, the man who dreamed of a better future. She felt a stirring of something within her, a feeling that was both frightening and exhilarating. It was a feeling she had not expected to feel, a feeling that threatened to shatter the walls she had built around her heart. The dove was beginning to question if the hawk was truly a predator, or just a creature fighting for survival, like herself. The line between them was blurring, and she wasn't sure if she should be terrified or relieved. The uncertainty was a heavy cloak, warming and suffocating at the same time. Chapter 5. Shadows of the Past. Autumn deepened, painting the Northwood landscape in hues of gold and crimson. The air grew colder, the nights longer, and a sense of unease settled over the castle. Whispers of unrest in the southern territories reached Northwood, rumors of rebellion brewing against King Alaric's rule. Edmund became increasingly preoccupied, spending long hours in council with his advisors, his brow furrowed with concern. Marjorie found herself drawn into the political machinations of the court. She listened to the discussions, observed the interactions, and began to understand the complex web of alliances and rivalries that governed the kingdom. She realized that her marriage to Edmund was not just a personal matter, but a strategic alliance, a key piece in the delicate balance of power. One evening, she found Edmund in the castle library, poring over maps and documents. He looked up as she entered, his face etched with weariness. "The situation in the south is worsening," he said, his voice heavy with concern. "Lord Elmsworth is gathering support for a rebellion. He claims that King Alaric is weak, unfit to rule." "And what do you believe, my lord?" Marjorie asked. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I believe that Elmsworth is ambitious and reckless. He is playing a dangerous game, one that could plunge the kingdom into another bloody war." "But you are bound by oath to support the king," Marjorie reminded him. "I am," he agreed. "But I also have a duty to protect my people. I will not lead them into a war that serves no purpose but to satisfy Elmsworth's lust for power." Marjorie saw the conflict in his eyes, the struggle between loyalty and duty. She understood his dilemma, the weight of responsibility that rested on his shoulders. "What will you do?" she asked. He looked at her, his gaze intense. "I will try to negotiate. I will try to find a peaceful solution. But if Elmsworth forces my hand, I will fight. I will defend my lands, my people, even if it means defying the king." His words sent a shiver down her spine. She knew that he was capable of great violence, of ruthless action. But she also saw his reluctance to resort to war, his desire for a peaceful resolution. In the days that followed, Marjorie became Edmund's confidant, his advisor. She listened to his concerns, offered her insights, and helped him to strategize. She discovered a sharp political mind within herself, a talent for diplomacy and negotiation that she had never known she possessed. She also learned more about Edmund's past, about the events that had shaped him into the man he was. She learned of his childhood, spent in the shadow of his father's brutal reign. She learned of his early battles, of the horrors he had witnessed, of the sacrifices he had made. One night, as they sat together by the fire in the library, he spoke of his first love, a young woman named Lyra, who had been killed during a raid by a rival clan. He spoke of his grief, of his guilt, of his vow to avenge her death. "I have never forgotten her," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "She was the light in my darkness, the only thing that kept me from succumbing to the brutality of my world." Marjorie listened, her heart aching for him. She understood his pain, his loss. She, too, had known the sting of grief, the emptiness of losing loved ones. She reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "I am sorry, my lord," she said softly. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a raw vulnerability that she had never seen before. He leaned in. As the distance closed between them, he whispered, "Sometimes I wonder if I am capable of loving again, Marjorie. If I am worthy of love." His hand moved to cover hers, his touch warm through the fabric of the dress. She looked away, towards the fire. The silence that had once been filled with tension was replaced by one of uncertainty. A past that still haunted, and a future that began to blur. She started to wonder what was real and what was a dream. The whispers, The uncertainty and all. Were they real, or she was a prisoner of her own fears? She had to find out soon, or else, she feared, she would be lost in the shadows. Chapter 6. The Tournament of Thorns. To bolster morale and demonstrate Northwood's strength amidst the growing unrest in the south, Edmund decided to host a grand tournament. Knights from across the region, including some who held sympathies towards Lord Elmsworth's rebellious faction, were invited to compete. The event was a calculated risk, a display of power intended to both intimidate rivals and solidify alliances. Marjorie, initially apprehensive about the potential for violence, found herself increasingly involved in the preparations. She oversaw the arrangements for the feast, the decorations, and the accommodations for the visiting nobles. She discovered a talent for organization and a keen eye for detail, ensuring that every aspect of the tournament was meticulously planned. She also insisted on one significant change to the traditional format. Instead of a purely martial competition, she suggested including contests of skill and artistry such as archery, falconry, and a musical competition. Edmund, initially skeptical, eventually agreed, recognizing the value of showcasing Northwood's cultural richness alongside its military might. The tournament grounds were a spectacle of color and pageantry. Banners bearing the crests of various noble houses fluttered in the breeze, the air filled with the sounds of trumpets, drums, and the excited chatter of the crowd. Knights clad in gleaming armor paraded their steeds, their lances held high. Marjorie, dressed in a gown of deep blue velvet, embroidered with silver thread, watched the proceedings from the royal box alongside Edmund. She felt a sense of pride in the event, in the way it showcased Northwood's strength and resilience. The first day of the tournament was dedicated to the joust. Knights charged at each other, their lances shattering against shields, the impact echoing through the grounds. The crowd roared its approval, cheering for their favorites. Marjorie found herself captivated by the spectacle, the raw power and skill of the knights. She watched Edmund, mounted on his black stallion, unhorse several opponents with ease, his movements precise and deadly. He was a formidable warrior, a force to be reckoned with. But she also noticed the subtle tensions beneath the surface of the festivities. She saw the veiled glances exchanged between rival knights, the whispered conversations in the shadows. She sensed the undercurrent of political intrigue, the potential for betrayal. One knight in particular caught her attention. Sir Gareth of Blackwood, a cousin of Lord Elmsworth, was a skilled warrior with a reputation for ruthlessness. He watched Edmund with a cold, calculating gaze, his eyes filled with animosity. During a break in the jousting, Sir Gareth approached Marjorie, his manner overly courteous, his words laced with veiled threats. "Lady Marjorie," he said, bowing low, "you are a vision of southern beauty amidst the northern barbarity. I trust you are finding your stay at Northwood comfortable?" Marjorie met his gaze, refusing to be intimidated. "I am finding it enlightening, Sir Gareth," she replied, her voice cool and measured. "Enlightening?" He raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing on his lips. "I trust you are learning the ways of the North, the importance of strength, of loyalty, and the dangers of treachery," Marjorie added, her voice unwavering. His smile vanished, replaced by a look of cold fury. "Treachery is a strong word, my lady, but sometimes it is necessary to choose sides, to decide where one's true loyalties lie." He turned and walked away, leaving Marjorie with a sense of unease. She knew that he was a dangerous man, a potential enemy. She also knew that he represented a threat not just to Edmund, but to the fragile peace that she had begun to hope for. That night, as she discussed the day's events with Edmund, she voiced her concerns about Sir Gareth. "He is a serpent, my lord," she said. "He is plotting something. I can feel it." Edmund nodded, his expression grim. "I am aware of his reputation. He is Elmsworth's man, through and through. But I cannot accuse him of treachery without proof." "We must be careful, my lord," Marjorie urged. "He is not to be trusted." Edmund looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of concern and admiration. "You have a sharp eye, Marjorie. You see things that others miss." I am grateful for your counsel. He reached out, taking her hand in his. His touch sent a shiver through her, a familiar spark of warmth that was beginning to feel less unsettling and more comforting. The tournament continued, a backdrop to their growing closeness and a stage for the simmering tensions that threatened to boil over. The thorns were hidden beneath the beauty, a constant reminder of the dangers that lurked beneath the surface of their fragile alliance. The games were afoot, and she was not sure who was playing whom. Chapter 7. Beneath the Armor. The tournament continued, a whirlwind of martial displays, feasting, and whispered intrigues. Marjorie found herself increasingly drawn into Edmund's world, attending council meetings, advising him on matters of diplomacy, and even helping him to draft correspondence to other northern lords. She discovered a strength and a political acumen she never knew she possessed. She also began to see a different side of Edmund, the man beneath the armor, the warrior who yearned for peace, the leader who bore the weight of his responsibilities with a quiet dignity. He was still a hard man, capable of ruthless action, but she saw glimpses of his vulnerability, his loneliness, his longing for connection. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of tournament events, she found him alone in the castle gardens, staring out at the moonlit landscape. He looked weary, his shoulders slumped, his face etched with exhaustion. She approached him quietly, her footsteps muffled by the soft grass. "My lord," she said softly, "you look troubled." He turned, startled by her presence. He had not heard her approach. He tried to mask his weariness with a faint smile, but she saw the pain in his eyes. "It is nothing, Marjorie," he said. "Just the weight of the world." She sat beside him on a stone bench, the cool night air raising goosebumps on her arms. "You carry too much on your shoulders, my lord," she said. "You need to share the burden." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "There are few I can trust, Marjorie. Few who understand the complexities of my position. I may not understand everything, my lord," she said, "but I am willing to listen. I am willing to help if I can." He looked at her, his eyes searching hers. He saw the sincerity in her gaze, the genuine concern. He hesitated for a moment, then began to speak, his voice low and hesitant. He spoke of his fears, of his doubts, of his struggles to maintain control in the face of growing unrest. He spoke of his loneliness, of his longing for a true companion, someone he could trust implicitly. Marjorie listened, her heart aching for him. She understood his isolation, his burden. She, too, had known loneliness, the feeling of being surrounded by people yet utterly alone. She reached out, placing a hand on his arm. Her touch was tentative at first, but then she squeezed his arm gently, offering a silent gesture of comfort and support. "You are not alone, my lord," she said softly. "I am here." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and surprise. He covered her hand with his own, his touch warm and reassuring. "Thank you, Marjorie," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea how much that means to me." They sat in silence for a long time, their hands clasped together, the moon casting a silvery glow over them. The silence was not awkward or strained, but comfortable, filled with a growing understanding, a deepening connection. Later that night, as Marjorie lay in her bed, she thought about the conversation with Edmund. She realized that she was beginning to care for him, to feel a genuine affection for the man beneath the armor. She was still wary, still aware of his past, of his capacity for violence. But she also saw his humanity, his vulnerability, his desire for something more than the endless cycle of conflict. She felt a stirring of hope, a belief that perhaps, just perhaps, their marriage could be more than a political alliance. Perhaps it could be a true partnership, a bond of mutual respect and affection. The next day, during the archery competition, Marjorie surprised everyone, including herself, by winning the contest. Her aim was true, her hand steady, her focus unwavering. Edmund watched her with pride, his eyes shining with admiration. He presented her with the winner's prize, a silver arrow, its tip adorned with a single, glittering ruby. "You are full of surprises, my lady," he said, his voice filled with warmth. "You are more than just a pretty face. You are a woman of strength, of skill, of hidden depths." His words, his praise, filled her with a sense of accomplishment, a feeling of validation. She had proven herself, not just to him, but to herself. She was not just a pawn in his game, but a player in her own right. As she accepted the prize, their fingers brushed, sending a jolt of electricity through her. She looked up at him, meeting his gaze. The air crackled with a different kind of tension, a spark of attraction that was undeniable. She had peeled away the armor and found something precious. But the vulnerability was mutual, and she realized that while he had shared his past, she still kept hers hidden. Would he still look at her with admiration if he knew the secrets she held? The doubt returned, a cold shadow on the warmth she had begun to feel. Chapter 8. A Dance of Defiance. The final day of the tournament arrived, bringing with it a sense of both excitement and apprehension. The main event was a melee, a mock battle involving all the participating knights. It was a test of strength, skill, and strategy, a chance for the knights to prove their prowess in a simulated war scenario. Marjorie, watching from the royal box, felt a knot of anxiety in her stomach. She knew that the melee was a dangerous event, that injuries were common, even fatal. She worried for Edmund, for his safety. He rode onto the field, clad in black armor, his helmet obscuring his features. He looked like a figure from a dark legend, a warrior born for battle. The melee began, a chaotic clash of steel and flesh. Knights fought on horseback and on foot, their swords ringing out, their shields clashing. The air was filled with the sounds of battle, the shouts of men, the screams of horses. Marjorie watched, her heart pounding in her chest, her eyes fixed on Edmund. He fought with a fierce intensity, his movements precise and deadly. He unhorsed several opponents, his sword flashing in the sunlight. But then, disaster struck. Sir Gareth of Blackwood, fueled by his animosity towards Edmund, deliberately targeted him, attacking him with a viciousness that went beyond the bounds of fair play. He struck Edmund a blow to the head, knocking him from his horse. Marjorie gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She saw Edmund fall, his body lying motionless on the ground. Sir Gareth raised his sword, preparing to deliver a killing blow. Without thinking, Marjorie acted. She leaped from the royal box, ignoring the protests of the guards, and ran onto the field, placing herself between Edmund and Sir Gareth. "Stop!" she cried, her voice ringing out across the battlefield. "He is your lord. You cannot kill him." Sir Gareth hesitated, his eyes widening in surprise. He had not expected this intervention, this act of defiance from the southern lady. The other knights, stunned by Marjorie's actions, ceased fighting. The melee ground to a halt, the silence broken only by the heavy breathing of the combatants. Sir Gareth lowered his sword, his face contorted with rage. "Out of my way, woman," he snarled. "This is none of your concern." "He is my husband," Marjorie retorted, her voice unwavering. "And I will not let you harm him." She stood her ground, her body shielding Edmund's, her eyes blazing with defiance. She was a lone figure, unarmed and vulnerable, facing down a seasoned warrior. But she was not afraid. She was driven by a fierce loyalty, a protective instinct that she had not known she possessed. Edmund, dazed but conscious, struggled to rise. He saw Marjorie standing before him, her body a shield against Sir Gareth's wrath. He was astonished by her courage, by her unwavering loyalty. He pushed himself to his feet, his head throbbing, his vision blurred. He placed a hand on Marjorie's shoulder, his touch reassuring. "Marjorie," he said, his voice hoarse, "get back. This is my fight." "No," she replied, her voice firm. "It is our fight." Edmund looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and admiration. He straightened his shoulders, drawing strength from her presence. He turned to face Sir Gareth, his expression grim. "Gareth," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "you have crossed the line. You have shown your true colors. You are a traitor, and you will be punished." Sir Gareth, realizing that he had overplayed his hand, backed down. He knew that he could not kill Edmund without facing the wrath of the entire Northwood army. I was merely testing his strength, my lord, he stammered, his voice lacking conviction. You were testing my patience, Edmund retorted. And you have failed. He ordered Sir Gareth to be arrested, stripped of his rank and title, and imprisoned. The tournament was declared over, the victory awarded to Northwood. Marjorie's act of defiance had not only saved Edmund's life, but had also exposed Sir Gareth's treachery, solidifying the loyalty of the other northern lords. She had proven herself to be more than just a pawn in their political games. She had shown herself to be a queen, a leader, a woman of courage and conviction. The dance had shifted, and she was no longer following but leading. But the defiance was not just against Gareth, it was against her own fears, her own doubts. And that made the dance even more dangerous, because she didn't know the steps. The unknown future loomed, a dark figure on the dance floor. Chapter 9. The Serpent's Kiss. The aftermath of the tournament saw a shift in the power dynamics within Northwood. Marjorie's courageous intervention had earned her the respect and admiration of the northern lords, who now saw her not just as Warwick's southern bride, but as a strong and decisive figure in her own right. Edmund, recovering from his injury, relied on her even more, entrusting her with greater responsibilities and seeking her counsel on matters of state. However, the serpent, though caged, was not vanquished. Sir Gareth, imprisoned in the castle dungeons, continued to plot his revenge. He had allies within Northwood, whispers of discontent that had not been silenced by his arrest. Marjorie sensed the lingering threat, the undercurrent of unease that permeated the castle. One evening, as she was walking through the castle corridors, she overheard a hushed conversation between two guards. They were discussing Sir Gareth, expressing their doubts about his guilt, their belief that he had been framed. Marjorie realized that Sir Gareth's influence was more pervasive than she had anticipated. He had managed to sow seeds of doubt, to create a faction of supporters who believed in his innocence. She reported the conversation to Edmund, urging him to take further action to neutralize the threat. He listened to her concerns, his expression grim. Gareth is a dangerous man, Marjorie, he said. He has a way of manipulating people, of turning them against their own lords. We cannot allow him to continue to spread his poison, Marjorie insisted. He must be silenced. Edmund agreed. He ordered that Sir Gareth be moved to a more secure location, a remote tower where he would have no contact with the outside world. He also increased the guard around the castle, tightening security measures. But even these precautions were not enough. Sir Gareth, through a network of secret contacts, managed to send a message to Lord Elmsworth, informing him of his imprisonment and urging him to accelerate his plans for rebellion. The message was intercepted by one of Edmund's spies, a young woman named Elara, a coincidence, no relation to Marjorie's mother, who had infiltrated Elmsworth's court. She risked her life to get the information to Edmund, delivering it to Marjorie in a secret meeting in the castle library. My lady, Elara whispered, her voice trembling with urgency, Elmsworth is planning to attack Northwood. He believes that with Warwick weakened and Gareth imprisoned, he can easily take the castle. Marjorie felt a chill run down her spine. The threat was no longer abstract, no longer a distant rumor. It was real, and it was imminent. She immediately informed Edmund of the news. He was shocked but not surprised. He had anticipated this move, had been preparing for it. We must prepare for war, Marjorie, he said, his voice grave. We must gather our forces, fortify the castle, and send word to our allies. He turned to leave the hall, when Marjorie called to him, Edmund. Her use of the name, not the title, stopped him. I will stand with you. Through the trials, to the end, whatever the end is. He met her gaze. And in a moment of clarity, he said, I know. But the serpent's kiss is often fatal. We need to be cautious. The days that followed were a blur of activity. The castle buzzed with preparations for war. Soldiers drilled in the courtyard. Blacksmiths hammered out weapons and armor. Provisions were stockpiled. The air was thick with tension, with the anticipation of battle. Marjorie played a crucial role in the preparations, organizing the castle staff, overseeing the supplies, and even helping to train the women in basic defense techniques. She showed a remarkable resilience, a determination to protect her new home, her new people. She had found her purpose, her place in this harsh, unforgiving land. She was no longer a stranger, an outsider. She was Lady of Northwood, a warrior queen, ready to defend her kingdom alongside her husband. But the kiss of the serpent, the betrayal, was still lurking. It was not just Elmsworth's attack, it was something closer, something within the castle walls. And she had a sinking feeling that she was the target. The question was, who was the serpent? And when would they strike? The uncertainty was a heavy poison, slowly seeping into her newfound strength. Chapter 10. Echoes in the Stone. The threat of Lord Elmsworth's impending attack loomed over Northwood like a gathering storm. Edmund, with Marjorie at his side, worked tirelessly to prepare for the siege. He rallied his bannermen, strengthened the castle defenses, and sent scouts to monitor Elmsworth's movements. The tension was palpable, every shadow seeming to hold a potential enemy. Amidst the preparations, Marjorie found herself increasingly drawn to the older parts of the castle, the ancient stones that whispered stories of generations past. She spent hours in the library, poring over old chronicles and family histories, seeking to understand the deep roots of Northwood and its people. She discovered tales of courage and resilience, of battles fought and won, of loves lost and found. One evening, while exploring a forgotten wing of the castle, she stumbled upon a hidden chamber. The room was small and dusty, its walls lined with ancient tapestries depicting scenes of warrior ancestors. In the center of the room stood a stone altar, its surface covered in strange symbols. Marjorie felt a strange pull towards the altar, a sense of connection to the past. She reached out, touching the cold stone. As her fingers brushed against the surface, a vision flooded her mind. She saw a woman, dressed in clothes similar to her own, standing before the same altar. The woman was weeping, her face contorted with grief. She held a dagger in her hand, its blade stained with blood. Marjorie recoiled, her heart pounding in her chest. The vision was so vivid, so real, that she felt as if she had been transported back in time. She struggled to understand the meaning of what she had seen. She sought out Lady Isolde, Edmund's aunt, the keeper of the castle's history and traditions. She described the hidden chamber and the vision she had experienced. Isolde listened intently, her face growing pale. "The chamber you found," she said, her voice hushed, "is the shrine of the first wife. It is a place of ancient power, a place where the spirits of our ancestors linger." "The woman I saw," Marjorie said. "Who is she?" Isolde hesitated, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and sadness. "She was Alara, the first wife of Lord Roderick Warwick, Edmund's great-grandfather. She was accused of treachery, of plotting against her husband. She took her own life in that chamber, rather than face the shame of a public execution." Marjorie felt a shiver run down her spine. The story echoed her own situation, the threat of treachery that hung over her. Was the vision a warning, a premonition of her own fate? But was she truly guilty? Marjorie asked. Or was she framed, like Sir Gareth claimed to be? Isolde sighed, her gaze distant. "The truth is lost to time, my lady. There are different versions of the story, whispers of betrayal and revenge. Some say she was innocent, a victim of her husband's paranoia. Others say she was a spy, a traitor who deserved her fate." Marjorie pondered Isolde's words. The echoes of the past resonated with the present, the lines between truth and falsehood blurred. She realized that the threat of treachery was not just external, from Lord Elmsworth, but also internal, from within the castle walls. She confided in Edmund, sharing her fears and her suspicions. He listened patiently, his expression grim. "I know there are those who still doubt me, Marjorie," he said. "Those who believe I am too harsh, too ruthless. Those who whisper that I am unfit to rule." "But who?" Marjorie asked. "Who is the serpent in our midst?" Edmund shook his head. "I do not know. But I will find them, and I will deal with them. He tightened the security around the castle, increasing the patrols, interrogating suspected dissidents. He was determined to root out the treachery, to protect his people, and to protect Marjorie. But the echoes of the past continued to haunt Marjorie. She felt a growing sense of unease, a premonition of impending doom. She knew that the serpent was still out there, waiting to strike. And she feared that she was the target. The stone held the answers, but they were fragmented, incomplete. And the vision, was it a warning or a curse? She wasn't sure, and the uncertainty was a chilling echo of its own, reverberating through the ancient halls of Northwood. The past was not dead, it was alive, and it was hunting her. Chapter 11. The Price of Honor. The expected attack from Lord Elmsworth did not materialize. Instead, a messenger arrived, bearing a white flag of truce and a letter sealed with Elmsworth's crest. He proposed a meeting with Edmund, a parley to discuss terms for a peaceful resolution. Edmund was skeptical, suspecting a trap, but Marjorie urged him to consider the offer. "If there is even a chance to avoid bloodshed, my lord," she said, "we must take it." He reluctantly agreed, recognizing the wisdom in her words. He sent a reply to Elmsworth, accepting the invitation to meet, but setting strict conditions for the parley. The meeting was to take place at a neutral location, a ruined monastery halfway between Northwood and Elmsworth's stronghold. Each lord would be allowed to bring only a small escort of guards. Marjorie insisted on accompanying Edmund, despite his protests. "I am your wife, my lord," she said. "My place is at your side. And I may be able to offer a different perspective, a way to bridge the gap between you and Elmsworth." He eventually relented, recognizing her strength and her diplomatic skills. He knew that she was not just a pawn in this game, but a player, a valuable asset. The journey to the ruined monastery was tense and fraught with danger. The landscape was bleak and desolate, the air thick with suspicion. They were constantly on guard, watching for any sign of ambush. They arrived at the monastery to find Elmsworth and his retinue already waiting. Elmsworth was a tall, imposing man with a cold, calculating gaze. He greeted Edmund with a curt nod, his manner barely concealing his hostility. The negotiations began, and they were difficult and protracted. Elmsworth demanded concessions that Edmund was unwilling to make. He accused Edmund of tyranny, of usurping the rightful authority of King Alaric. Marjorie played a crucial role in the negotiations, acting as a mediator between the two men. She spoke with eloquence and passion, appealing to their sense of reason, their desire for peace. "Lord Elmsworth," she said, "we are all men of the North. We share a common heritage, a common culture. We should be allies, not enemies. Surely, we can find a way to resolve our differences without resorting to bloodshed." Her words seemed to have some effect on Elmsworth. He softened his stance, showing a willingness to compromise. But the negotiations were still on a knife's edge, the threat of violence ever present. Suddenly, a cry rang out from one of the guards. "Treachery! We are betrayed!" A group of armed men, disguised as monks, emerged from the shadows of the monastery, attacking Edmund's escort. It was a trap, just as Edmund had feared. Chaos erupted. Swords clashed, men screamed, blood flowed. Edmund fought with his usual ferocity, defending himself against the attackers. Marjorie, unarmed but undaunted, stood by his side, using her wits and her courage to protect him. She saw one of the attackers, a man she recognized as one of Sir Gareth's former guards, raise his sword to strike Edmund from behind. Without thinking, she threw herself in front of Edmund, shielding him with her body. The blade struck her, piercing her shoulder. She cried out in pain, falling to the ground. Edmund, seeing her fall, roared with rage. He turned on the attacker, killing him with a single blow. He knelt beside Marjorie, his face contorted with anguish. "Marjorie!" "No." She was bleeding heavily, her face pale, her breathing shallow. He cradled her in his arms, his tears falling onto her face. "Hold on, Marjorie," he pleaded. "Hold on. You will not die. I will not let you die." The remaining attackers, seeing their plan foiled and their leader's wife injured, fled into the ruins. The battle was over, but the price of honor had been paid. Marjorie's sacrifice had saved Edmund, but at a terrible cost. The monastery, a place of supposed peace, had become a scene of betrayal and bloodshed. And the future, once again, was shrouded in uncertainty. The wound was not just physical, it was a wound to the trust, to the hope that had been slowly building. And Edmund knew that even if she survived, the scar would remain, a constant reminder of the price they had paid. Chapter 12. A Tapestry of Lies. Marjorie hovered between life and death. Edmund, refusing to leave her side, ordered his men to carry her back to Northwood with all possible speed. He held her hand throughout the agonizing journey, whispering words of encouragement, his voice choked with emotion. He blamed himself for her injury, for his failure to anticipate the treachery. The castle maester, a skilled but somber man, worked tirelessly to save her. He cleaned and bandaged the wound, administering herbs and potions to fight the infection. But the prognosis was uncertain. Marjorie had lost a great deal of blood, and her fever raged. Edmund kept a vigil at her bedside, watching her every breath, praying for her recovery. He refused to eat or sleep, his face haggard, his eyes haunted. He realized, with a crushing weight, how much she had come to mean to him. She was not just his wife, his ally, but the center of his world, the light in his darkness. Lady Isolde, despite her initial reservations about Marjorie, proved to be a source of comfort and support. She assisted the maester, offering her knowledge of traditional healing methods. She also tried to persuade Edmund to rest, to take care of himself, but he refused. "I will not leave her," he said, his voice hoarse. "I will not abandon her, as I abandoned others." Isolde understood his guilt, his remorse. She knew that he was haunted by the ghosts of his past, by the memory of Lyra, his first love, who had died because of his negligence. As Marjorie lay unconscious, she drifted in and out of reality, her mind filled with fragmented memories and fevered dreams. She saw images of her childhood, of her family, of her home in Winthorne. She saw visions of Edmund, his face sometimes fierce and unyielding, sometimes tender and vulnerable. She also saw glimpses of the hidden chamber, of the woman with the bloody dagger. She heard whispers, accusations, denials. She felt the weight of betrayal, the sting of injustice. In her delirium, she spoke, uttering words that Edmund could not understand. She called out for her brother, Edward, for her father, for Lyra. She murmured about a secret, a hidden truth that had been buried for too long. Edmund listened, his heart aching for her. He realized that there were depths to her past, to her experiences, that he had never known. He began to suspect that her connection to the vision in the hidden chamber was more profound than he had imagined. After 3 agonizing days, Marjorie's fever broke. She opened her eyes, her gaze weak but clear. She saw Edmund sitting beside her, his face etched with exhaustion, his eyes filled with relief. "Edmund," she whispered, her voice raspy. He grasped her hand, his touch gentle.
"Marjorie."
"You are alive. You are safe." Tears welled up in her eyes. I thought I was going to die."
"You are strong, Marjorie," he said. "Stronger than you know."
As she slowly regained her strength, Marjorie began to piece together the events of the attack. She remembered the disguised attackers, the man she recognized as one of Sir Gareth's former guards. She realized that the treachery ran deeper than she had imagined. She also remembered the whispers she had heard in her delirium, the fragmented memories that had surfaced. She realized that the secret of the hidden chamber, the story of Alara, the first wife of Lord Roderick Warwick, was somehow connected to the present, to the threat that still loomed over Northwood. With Edmund's help, she began to unravel the tapestry of lies that had been woven over generations. They discovered that Sir Gareth was not just a pawn of Lord Elmsworth, but a descendant of Alara, the accused traitress. He had been seeking revenge for his ancestor's death, plotting to overthrow Edmund and reclaim what he believed to be his rightful inheritance. The attack had been orchestrated with meticulous detail, and the attackers were all followers and close kin to Gareth. The revelation was shocking, but it also brought a sense of clarity. The past and the present were intertwined, the echoes of betrayal resonating through time. Marjorie and Edmund had become players in a centuries-old drama, a feud that had claimed countless lives. The truth was a weapon, but it was a double-edged sword. It could expose the traitors, but it could also shatter the fragile foundations of Northwood. The question was, how to use it without destroying everything they had fought for. Chapter 13. The Falcon's Flight. With the truth of Sir Gareth's lineage and his plot revealed, Edmund acted swiftly and decisively. He gathered his loyal bannermen, presenting them with the evidence of Gareth's treachery and his connection to the long-dead Alara. The Northern Lords, initially swayed by Gareth's whispers, were now united in their condemnation of his actions. They pledged their unwavering support to Edmund, vowing to crush any remaining resistance. Marjorie, though still recovering from her injury, insisted on participating in the council meetings. Her presence, a symbol of resilience and defiance, inspired the lords and bolstered their resolve. She offered her insights, her strategic mind proving invaluable in planning the next steps. Edmund, with Marjorie's counsel, decided to confront Lord Elmsworth directly. He sent a message to Elmsworth, challenging him to a duel, a single combat to decide the fate of the North. He knew that it was a risky move, but he was confident in his strength and his skill. He also believed that it was the only way to avoid a protracted and bloody war. Elmsworth, surprised by Edmund's boldness, accepted the challenge. He believed that he could easily defeat Edmund, weakened by his recent injury and distracted by his wife's condition. He saw it as an opportunity to seize control of Northwood without a major conflict. The duel was to take place on a windswept plain near the border between their territories. Marjorie, against Edmund's wishes, insisted on accompanying him. She refused to stay behind, to be left in the dark. She wanted to be there, to witness the confrontation, to support her husband. "I will not be a burden, my lord," she said, her voice firm. "I will be your strength, your inspiration. And if the worst should happen, I will be there to carry on your legacy." Edmund, seeing the determination in her eyes, relented. He knew that he could not dissuade her, that her spirit was as untamed as the northern winds. They rode to the meeting place, accompanied by a small escort of guards. The air was thick with tension, the silence broken only by the sound of the horses' hooves and the cry of a falcon circling overhead. Elmsworth arrived, his face a mask of arrogance and contempt. He dismounted his horse, drawing his sword. Edmund mirrored his actions, his expression grim and resolute. The duel began, a clash of steel and will. The two men fought with a fierce intensity, their swords ringing out across the plain. Elmsworth, driven by ambition and hatred, attacked relentlessly. Edmund, fueled by a sense of justice and a desire to protect his people, defended himself with skill and determination. Marjorie watched, her heart pounding in her chest, her breath held captive in her throat. She saw the strain on Edmund's face, the pain in his eyes. She knew that he was fighting not just for his life, but for the future of Northwood, for their future. The fight was long and brutal. Both men sustained injuries, their armor dented, their bodies bruised. But Edmund, despite his weakened state, gradually gained the upper hand. His training, his experience, his unwavering focus gave him an advantage. Finally, with a powerful blow, Edmund disarmed Elmsworth, sending his sword flying across the plain. He stood over his fallen opponent, his sword pointed at Elmsworth's throat. "Yield," Edmund commanded, his voice hoarse. Elmsworth, defeated and humiliated, spat on the ground. "Never," he snarled. Edmund hesitated. He could kill Elmsworth, and the threat once and for all. But he saw the fear in his opponent's eyes, the desperation. He also saw Marjorie watching him, her expression filled with a mixture of hope and apprehension. He lowered his sword. "I will not kill you, Elmsworth," he said. "I will spare your life. But you will swear an oath of fealty to me, and you will never again raise arms against Northwood." Elmsworth, surprised by Edmund's mercy, hesitated. He had expected death, not clemency. He looked at Marjorie, seeing the strength and compassion in her eyes. He realized that he had been wrong about her, about them both. He knelt before Edmund, bowing his head. "I swear fealty to you, Lord Warwick," he said, his voice subdued. "I will serve you faithfully." The duel was over. The threat of rebellion was extinguished. Edmund had won, not just a battle, but a victory for peace, for unity. Marjorie ran to him, embracing him tightly. The falcon, a symbol of Northwood, soared high above, its cry echoing across the plain, a triumphant call of freedom and resilience. The flight was not just of the bird, but of their hopes, their dreams, their future. But the victory was not complete. There was still one loose end, one serpent to be dealt with. Sir Gareth, languishing in his prison. And Marjorie knew that until he was dealt with, the shadow of betrayal would continue to loom over them. Chapter 14. Scars of Loyalty. The return to Northwood was a triumphant one, but the celebrations were muted by the lingering threat of Sir Gareth. Though imprisoned and isolated, his very existence was a reminder of the treachery that had almost cost Marjorie her life and threatened the stability of the North. Edmund, hardened by the recent events, was determined to deal with Gareth swiftly and decisively. He convened a council of his most trusted advisors, including Marjorie, to decide Gareth's fate. "He is a traitor, a murderer," Edmund declared, his voice cold and unforgiving.
"He deserves to die."
Several of the lords echoed his sentiment, calling for Gareth's immediate execution. But Marjorie, despite her own near-fatal encounter with Gareth's treachery, hesitated. "My lord," she said, her voice soft but firm, "I understand your anger, your desire for retribution. But I believe that we must be careful. Executing Gareth without a proper trial, without hearing his side of the story, would make us no better than him." Her words caused a stir among the council. Some of the lords grumbled their disapproval, accusing her of being too soft, too forgiving. But Edmund, though his initial inclination was towards swift justice, listened to her counsel. He knew that Marjorie had a keen sense of justice, a deep understanding of human nature. He also respected her courage, her unwavering loyalty, even in the face of danger. "What do you propose, Marjorie?" he asked. "I propose that we bring Gareth before us," she said. "That we hear his testimony, that we examine the evidence against him, and that we make a decision based on reason, not on emotion." Edmund considered her proposal. He knew that it was the right thing to do, the honorable course of action. But he also feared that Gareth, with his cunning and his charisma, might be able to sway the council, to sow further seeds of doubt. "Very well," he said, his voice resolute. "We will hold a trial. Gareth will be given a chance to defend himself. But I warn you all, if he is found guilty, he will face the full consequences of his actions." Gareth was brought before the council, his chains rattling, his eyes defiant. He was a shadow of his former self, his arrogance replaced by a sullen anger. He listened to the accusations against him, the evidence of his treachery, his connection to Alara, his plot to overthrow Edmund. He denied everything, claiming that he was a victim of a conspiracy, that he had been framed by Edmund and Marjorie. "I am innocent," he declared, his voice ringing with false sincerity. "I am a loyal servant of Northwood. I would never betray my lord." His words were met with skepticism and derision. The lords had seen the evidence, heard the testimony of witnesses. They were not swayed by his protestations of innocence. But Marjorie, watching him closely, saw something in his eyes, a flicker of something that was not defiance, but fear. She sensed that there was more to the story, a hidden truth that had not yet been revealed. She asked to question Gareth herself. Edmund, trusting her instincts, granted her request. Marjorie approached Gareth, her gaze unwavering. "Sir Gareth," she said, her voice calm and measured, "I know that you are lying. I know that you were involved in the plot against my husband. But I also believe that there is something you are not telling us. Something that is driving you, motivating you." Gareth hesitated, his eyes darting around the room. He looked at Edmund, his expression filled with hatred. He looked at Marjorie, his gaze a mixture of fear and something else. "What is it, Gareth?" Marjorie pressed. "What is the secret you are hiding?" He finally broke, his composure crumbling. He confessed, not just to his own treachery, but to a deeper, more shocking truth. "I am not just Alara's descendant," he revealed, his voice trembling. I am Edmund's half-brother." The revelation stunned the council into silence. Edmund stared at Gareth, his face a mask of disbelief. Gareth explained that his mother, a servant in the Warwick household, had had a secret affair with Edmund's father. He had been born in secrecy, raised in shame, his true parentage hidden from him. "My mother told me the truth on her deathbed," Gareth said. "She told me that I was the rightful heir to Northwood, that Edmund was a usurper. His motive, he claimed, was not just revenge for Alara, but a desire to reclaim his birthright, to take what he believed was rightfully his." The scars of loyalty were not just on Marjorie's shoulder, but on the very fabric of Northwood, hidden beneath layers of lies and deceit. The truth, once revealed, was a devastating blow, shaking the foundations of Edmund's world. He had been betrayed, not just by a rival, but by his own blood. The revelation forced him to confront not only Gareth, but the legacy of his father, a legacy of cruelty and deception. The trial was no longer about Gareth's guilt, but about the very identity of Northwood, and of Edmund himself. He stared at the man, the brother, that wanted him dead. Chapter 15. The Frozen Heart Thaws. The revelation of Gareth's true parentage sent shockwaves through Northwood. Edmund, reeling from the news, struggled to reconcile the image of his father, the ruthless but respected warlord, with the man who had fathered a child in secret and abandoned him to a life of shame. He felt a mixture of anger, betrayal, and a strange, unsettling pity for Gareth. Marjorie, despite her own shock, remained a pillar of strength for Edmund. She understood the turmoil he was experiencing, the shattering of his illusions. She offered him comfort, support, and a clear-headed perspective. "My lord," she said, "your father's actions were wrong, unforgivable. But you are not your father. You are a different man, a better man. You have shown mercy, compassion, where he showed only cruelty." Her words helped to ease his pain, to soothe his wounded pride. He realized that she was right. He could not be held responsible for his father's sins. He could only choose his own path, forge his own destiny. He ordered that Gareth be held in confinement, not as a traitor, but as a prisoner of war. He needed time to process the revelation, to decide what to do with his newly discovered half-brother. In the days that followed, Edmund wrestled with his emotions, his sense of identity shaken to its core. He spent hours in the castle library, poring over old records, seeking to uncover the truth about his father's past, about Gareth's mother. He discovered that Gareth's mother, a woman named Lyra, another coincidence of names, not Edmund's lost love, had been a kind and gentle soul, a victim of his father's lust and cruelty. She had been forced into silence, threatened with death if she ever revealed the truth about her child's parentage. Edmund felt a growing sense of empathy for Gareth, for the life of hardship and resentment he had endured. He began to understand his motives, his desire for revenge, his claim to the Northwood inheritance. But he also knew that Gareth's actions, his treachery, could not be excused. He had threatened the stability of Northwood, had almost cost Marjorie her life. He had to be held accountable. Marjorie, sensing Edmund's inner conflict, encouraged him to speak with Gareth, to try to understand him, to find a way to reconcile their differences. "He is your brother, Edmund," she said. "Despite everything, he is your blood. You share a connection, a history. Perhaps, if you can find a way to forgive him, to offer him a place in your world, you can both find peace." Edmund, initially resistant to the idea, eventually agreed. He knew that Marjorie was right. He had to try, for his own sake, for Gareth's, for the future of Northwood. He visited Gareth in his cell, a small, sparsely furnished room in the castle tower. Gareth, expecting anger and condemnation, was surprised by Edmund's demeanor. He was calm, composed, his expression not of hatred, but of sadness. Gareth, Edmund said, his voice low and even, I know the truth about your parentage. I know about your mother, about the life you have lived. Gareth looked at him, his eyes filled with a mixture of suspicion and resentment. And what? Are you going to kill me now? Finish what your father started?
No, Edmund replied.
I am not going to kill you. I am not my father. I am going to offer you a choice. He explained that he was willing to acknowledge Gareth as his half-brother, to offer him a place in the Northwood family, a title, lands, a chance to start a new life. But Edmund added, his voice hardening, you must renounce your claim to the Northwood lordship. You must swear an oath of fealty to me, and you must promise to never again raise arms against me or my people. Gareth was stunned by Edmund's offer. He had expected punishment, not forgiveness. He had expected hatred, not compassion. He hesitated, his mind warring with conflicting emotions. He had spent his life dreaming of revenge, of reclaiming his birthright. But now, faced with the possibility of acceptance, of belonging, he found himself questioning his desires. He had witnessed and been the center of bloodshed for that dream. He looked at Edmund, seeing not a tyrant, but a man struggling to do what was right, a man offering him a chance at redemption. He looked at his brother. I accept, Gareth said, his voice trembling. I swear fealty to you, Edmund. I will serve you faithfully. He reached out and took Edmund's hand.
It was a step.
The frozen heart of Northwood, hardened by years of conflict and betrayal, began to thaw. Edmund had chosen mercy over vengeance, forgiveness over hatred. He had broken the cycle of violence, offering a new path, a new hope for the future. The scars remained, but they were no longer a source of pain, but a reminder of the strength, the resilience, the compassion that had emerged from the darkness. He looked at the man, that was his blood, the brother he had. And a new journey began, an uncertain one. Chapter 16. Flames of Rebellion. Despite the resolution between Edmund and Gareth, the peace of Northwood remained fragile. The embers of Lord Elmsworth's rebellion, though seemingly extinguished, still smoldered in the hearts of some of his former supporters. Rumors of unrest and secret gatherings reached Edmund's ears, carried by his spies and informants. He knew that he had to act decisively to prevent another outbreak of violence. He strengthened the castle garrisons, increased patrols, and sent messages to his loyal bannermen, urging them to remain vigilant. Marjorie, fully recovered from her injury, continued to be his closest advisor, her sharp mind and unwavering loyalty invaluable in these turbulent times. She also took on a more active role in the governance of Northwood, overseeing the welfare of the people, ensuring that justice was served fairly and impartially. One evening, a coded message arrived from Alara, Edmund's spy who had previously infiltrated Lord Elmsworth's court. The message revealed a plot to assassinate Edmund and Marjorie, to be carried out during the upcoming Harvest Festival, a traditional celebration held in the town square. The plotters were a group of die-hard Elmsworth loyalists, fueled by resentment and a desire to restore their former lord to power. They planned to use the chaos and confusion of the festival to strike, hoping to plunge Northwood into anarchy. Edmund, upon receiving the news, was furious. He wanted to round up the conspirators immediately to make an example of them. But Marjorie, ever the voice of reason, urged caution. My lord, she said, if we act too hastily, we risk driving the plotters underground, making them even more dangerous. We need to gather more information, to identify all those involved, and to ensure that we have irrefutable proof of their guilt. Edmund, recognizing the wisdom in her words, agreed. He tasked Alara with gathering more intelligence, with infiltrating the conspirators' ranks and uncovering their plans. Alara, risking her life, managed to gain the trust of the plotters. She learned the details of their assassination plan, the names of those involved, and the location of their secret meetings. She relayed the information to Marjorie, who in turn shared it with Edmund. They now had enough evidence to act, to crush the rebellion before it could ignite. But Marjorie, ever mindful of the potential for bloodshed, proposed a different approach. She suggested that they use the Harvest Festival as an opportunity to expose the plotters publicly, to reveal their treachery to the people of Northwood. If we can show the people that these men are not acting in their best interests, she said, that they are motivated by selfish ambition and a desire for revenge, we can turn public opinion against them. We can isolate them, making it impossible for them to carry out their plans. Edmund, initially skeptical, eventually agreed. He saw the potential in her plan, the opportunity to not just defeat the conspirators, but to unite the people of Northwood behind him. They devised a plan to use the Harvest Festival as a stage for their counteroffensive. They would allow the plotters to believe that their plan was still in motion, that they had the element of surprise. But in reality, they would be walking into a trap. The Harvest Festival arrived, a vibrant spectacle of color and activity. The town square was filled with stalls selling food and crafts, with musicians playing lively tunes, with people dancing and celebrating. Edmund and Marjorie, dressed in their finest attire, presided over the festivities, their presence a symbol of unity and strength. The plotters, disguised as ordinary citizens, mingled with the crowd, their weapons hidden beneath their clothes. They waited for the signal, for the moment to strike. But as the sun began to set and the festival reached its climax, Edmund stepped forward, raising his hand for silence. The music stopped, the chatter died down. All eyes turned to him. "My people," he said, his voice booming across the square, "I have come before you today to celebrate our harvest, to give thanks for our blessings. But I have also come to expose a treachery, a plot against our peace, against our lives." He then proceeded to reveal the details of the assassination plan, naming the conspirators, describing their motives, their methods. He presented the evidence gathered by Alara, leaving no doubt of their guilt. The crowd reacted with a mixture of shock, anger, and disbelief. They turned on the plotters, their faces contorted with rage. They had been betrayed, their trust violated. The plotters, realizing that they had been exposed, tried to escape, but they were quickly surrounded by Edmund's guards and the angry mob. They were captured, disarmed, and brought before Edmund. He looked at them, his expression filled with a mixture of pity and contempt. He had given them a chance to repent, to choose a different path. But they had chosen violence, treachery. "You have betrayed your people," he said, his voice cold and unforgiving. "You have forfeited your right to live among us." He ordered that they be banished from Northwood, stripped of their lands and titles, their names forever stained with shame. The flames of rebellion were extinguished, not with violence, but with truth, with justice, with the power of public opinion. Marjorie's plan had worked. She had saved Northwood, not with a sword, but with her wisdom, her courage, her unwavering belief in the power of unity. But the cost was heavy. The trust had been violated again, and the festive day was a cruel reminder. Chapter 17. The Wolf's Embrace. The banishment of the conspirators marked a turning point in Edmund's reign. He had proven his strength, his decisiveness, but also his commitment to justice and his willingness to listen to wise counsel. The people of Northwood, initially wary of their southern-born lady, now saw Marjorie as their protector, their advocate, a leader in her own right. Edmund, recognizing Marjorie's growing influence and her deep understanding of the northern people, began to share more of his power with her. He appointed her to his council, giving her a formal voice in the governance of Northwood. He also entrusted her with overseeing the welfare of the people, with implementing reforms to improve their lives. Marjorie, embracing her new responsibilities, worked tirelessly to improve the lives of the common folk. She established schools, hospitals, and programs to assist the poor and the needy. She also reformed the legal system, ensuring that justice was served fairly and impartially. She became known as Marjorie the Just, a title that reflected her compassion, her wisdom, and her unwavering commitment to fairness. She was loved and respected by the people, who saw her as a symbol of hope, a beacon of light in the often harsh and unforgiving world of the North. Edmund, witnessing Marjorie's transformation, felt a growing sense of pride and admiration. He had married her for political reasons, to secure an alliance, to consolidate his power. But he had found in her something far more valuable, a true partner, a trusted advisor, a woman he had come to love deeply and unconditionally. Their relationship, once marked by tension and suspicion, had blossomed into a genuine love affair. They shared a bond of mutual respect, affection, and a shared vision for the future of Northwood. One evening, as they stood together on the castle battlements, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Edmund turned to Marjorie, his eyes filled with emotion. "Marjorie," he said, his voice soft and tender, "I never thought I could love again. After Lyra, I believed my heart was frozen, incapable of feeling anything but duty and responsibility." He took her hand, his touch gentle. "But you have thawed my heart. You have shown me that love can be a source of strength, of healing, of hope. You have made me a better man." Marjorie, her eyes glistening with tears, met his gaze. "And you, Edmund," she said, "you have given me a purpose, a home, a family. You have shown me that even in the darkest of times, there is always light, always hope." He leaned in, kissing her softly, tenderly. It was a kiss that spoke of love, of trust, of a shared future. It was a kiss that sealed their bond, their commitment to each other. In the months that followed, their love deepened, their partnership strengthened. They ruled Northwood together, guiding their people through times of peace and prosperity. They faced challenges, setbacks, but they always faced them together, united in their purpose, their love. Gareth, now a loyal member of the Northwood family, proved to be a valuable asset. He had renounced his claim to the lordship, but he had retained his warrior skills, his knowledge of the northern lands. He served Edmund faithfully, acting as a trusted advisor and a skilled commander in the Northwood army. He and Marjorie developed a cautious friendship, built on a shared understanding of their pasts, their experiences of betrayal and loss. They found solace in each other's company, a bond forged in the crucible of adversity. The wolf's embrace, once a symbol of fear and oppression, had become a symbol of love, of protection, of a family united. Edmund, the fierce warlord, had found his heart. Marjorie, the captive bride, had found her home. And Northwood, the land of ice and snow, had found a warmth, a light, that promised a brighter future. But even in the embrace, the past was not forgotten. The whispers remained, a constant question of what the future held. Chapter 18. A Crown of Ashes. Years passed, and Northwood prospered under the joint rule of Edmund and Marjorie. Their love had blossomed. Their family had grown. They had 2 children, a son named Thomas, after Marjorie's father, and a daughter named Lyra, a bittersweet tribute to Edmund's first love, a gesture of reconciliation with his past that Marjorie herself had suggested. But the peace of Northwood was not destined to last forever. News arrived from the south that King Alaric was dead, his passing shrouded in mystery and suspicion. The kingdom was plunged into chaos, with various factions vying for the throne. Lord Elmsworth, despite his oath of fealty to Edmund, saw an opportunity to seize power. He broke his vow, raising an army and marching south, claiming the throne for himself. Other lords followed suit, and the kingdom descended into a bloody civil war. Edmund, bound by his own sense of honor and his commitment to maintaining order, had no choice but to intervene. He gathered his forces, preparing to march south, to quell the rebellion and restore peace to the realm. Marjorie, though fearful for Edmund's safety, supported his decision. She knew that he could not stand idly by while the kingdom tore itself apart. She also recognized that this was an opportunity for Edmund to not just restore order, but to potentially claim the throne for himself, to unite the warring factions under his rule. Before departing for war, Edmund appointed Marjorie as regent of Northwood, entrusting her with the governance of their lands in his absence. He knew that she was capable, that she would rule wisely and justly. "Marjorie," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "you are the heart of Northwood. You are its strength, its conscience. I know that you will protect our people, our children, our future." He kissed her farewell, a long, lingering kiss that spoke of love, of trust, of a shared destiny. He then rode off to war, leaving Marjorie to face the challenges of leadership alone. The war in the south was long and brutal. Edmund, despite his military prowess, faced numerous setbacks. He encountered fierce resistance from Elmsworth and other rebel lords who were determined to seize the throne for themselves. News of the war reached Northwood, filtered through messengers and returning soldiers. Marjorie, despite her anxiety for Edmund's safety, ruled with a firm hand, maintaining order and ensuring the welfare of her people. She also faced challenges of her own. There were whispers of dissent within Northwood, rumors of plots to overthrow her rule, to take advantage of Edmund's absence. Gareth, despite his proven loyalty, was viewed with suspicion by some, his past a constant shadow hanging over him. Marjorie, relying on her instincts and her trusted advisors, managed to quell the unrest, to maintain stability in Northwood. She proved to be a strong and decisive leader, capable of handling crises with grace and wisdom. But then, devastating news arrived from the south. Edmund had been wounded in battle, his injury severe. He was alive, but his condition was critical. Marjorie, upon receiving the news, was shattered. She felt a wave of grief, of fear, of despair wash over her. She could not imagine life without Edmund, without his strength, his love, his guidance. She immediately made plans to travel south, to be by his side. She entrusted the regency of Northwood to Gareth, a decision that was met with some resistance, but she stood firm, trusting in his loyalty and his ability. She rode south with a small escort, her heart filled with dread and determination. She had to reach Edmund, to see him, to help him. She arrived at the battlefield, a scene of devastation and carnage. She found Edmund lying in a tent, his body bandaged, his face pale and drawn. He was unconscious, his breathing shallow. She knelt beside him, taking his hand in hers. She spoke to him, whispering words of love, of encouragement, of hope. She prayed for his recovery, for his survival. But the crown, the symbol of power and authority, seemed to be made of ashes. The war had taken its toll, not just on Edmund, but on the entire kingdom. The future was uncertain, the path ahead fraught with danger. Marjorie, facing the possibility of losing the man she loved, the father of her children, felt the weight of responsibility, the burden of leadership, pressing down on her. And a question loomed. Could she save him? Chapter 19. The Dawn of Reckoning. Marjorie remained by Edmund's side, nursing him day and night, willing him to live. She consulted with the battlefield healers, learning how to tend to his wounds, how to administer the necessary medicines. She spoke to him constantly, even though he remained unconscious, telling him stories of their life together, of their children of Northwood. Slowly, miraculously, Edmund began to recover. His fever subsided, his breathing grew stronger, his wounds began to heal. After weeks of agonizing uncertainty, he finally opened his eyes, his gaze weak but clear. He saw Marjorie sitting beside him, her face etched with exhaustion, her eyes filled with relief and love. "Marjorie," he whispered, his voice hoarse. She grasped his hand, tears streaming down her face. "Edmund, you are alive. You are back with me." His recovery was slow and arduous, but with Marjorie's unwavering care and his own indomitable will, he gradually regained his strength. He learned that the war in the South had reached a stalemate, with no clear victor emerging. The various factions, exhausted and depleted by the prolonged conflict, had agreed to a temporary truce. Edmund, realizing that he could no longer continue the fight, decided to return to Northwood. He knew that his primary duty was to his people, to his family. He also recognized that Marjorie, in his absence, had proven herself to be a capable and wise ruler, deserving of his trust and his respect. They returned to Northwood, greeted by the cheers of their people, who were overjoyed to see their lord and lady return. Edmund, though still weak, addressed the crowd, thanking them for their loyalty, their support. He also acknowledged Marjorie's leadership, praising her strength, her wisdom, her compassion. "My people," he said, his voice ringing out across the square, "I have been away for too long. I have fought a war that has brought only suffering and destruction. I have returned to Northwood, to my home, to my family, to the woman who has ruled wisely and justly in my absence. I have returned to Lady Marjorie, my wife, my partner, my queen." His words were met with thunderous applause. The people of Northwood had accepted Marjorie as their leader, their equal to Edmund. They had witnessed her strength, her resilience, her unwavering commitment to their welfare. In the months that followed, Edmund and Marjorie worked together to rebuild Northwood, to heal the wounds of war. They also began to negotiate with the various factions in the south, seeking to find a lasting peace for the kingdom. Edmund, recognizing that he was no longer the strong, invincible warrior he once was, began to consider the future of Northwood, of his succession. He had 2 children, Thomas and Lyra, but they were still young. He discussed the matter with Marjorie, seeking her counsel. They agreed that the best course of action was to establish a regency council, a group of trusted advisors who would rule Northwood until Thomas came of age. They appointed Gareth to the council, along with Lady Isolde and several other loyal lords and ladies. They also established a system of laws and procedures to ensure a smooth transition of power to prevent future conflicts. Edmund, having faced his own mortality, having witnessed the devastation of war, had come to realize the importance of peace, of stability, of a secure future for his people. He had learned to temper his warrior spirit with wisdom, his ambition with compassion. The dawn of reckoning had arrived, not just for Edmund, but for Northwood, for the entire kingdom. The old ways, the ways of violence and conquest, were giving way to a new era, an era of peace, of cooperation, of shared leadership. Marjorie, the southern bride who had once been viewed with suspicion, had become the architect of this new era, the guiding light for her people. The journey had been long and arduous, filled with challenges and sacrifices, but it had led to a new beginning, a new hope for the future. Chapter 20. A Vow Renewed. As the years passed, Northwood flourished under the wise and compassionate rule of Edmund and Marjorie. The Regency Council, guided by their shared vision, ensured stability and prosperity. Thomas, their son, grew into a strong and intelligent young man, inheriting his father's courage and his mother's wisdom. Lyra, their daughter, blossomed into a beautiful and kind-hearted young woman, embodying the best qualities of both her parents. Edmund, though his physical strength had diminished, remained a powerful presence in Northwood, his counsel sought by all. He devoted his time to mentoring Thomas, preparing him for the day when he would inherit the lordship. He also spent countless hours with Marjorie, their love for each other deepening with each passing year. One crisp autumn evening, as they sat together in the castle gardens, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant colors, Edmund turned to Marjorie, his eyes filled with a profound tenderness. "Marjorie," he said, his voice soft and filled with emotion, "we have been through so much together. We have faced war, betrayal, loss, and uncertainty. But through it all, our love has endured, our bond has strengthened." He took her hand, his touch gentle, his gaze unwavering. "I remember the day I first saw you, standing before me in the courtyard of Northwood Castle. You were so young, so frightened, yet so defiant. I thought you were a pawn, a prize to be won. But you were so much more." Tears welled up in Marjorie's eyes, her heart overflowing with love for this man who had been her captor, her husband, her partner, her soulmate. "And I," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I remember thinking you were a monster, a ruthless warlord who had destroyed my world. But you proved me wrong, Edmund. You showed me your heart, your compassion, your strength." He brought her hand to his lips, kissing it softly. "I want to renew our vows, Marjorie," he said. "I want to stand before our people, before the gods, and pledge my love to you once again. I want to reaffirm our commitment to each other, to Northwood, to our future." Marjorie, her heart soaring with joy, nodded her agreement. "Yes, Edmund," she said. "Yes, I would be honored." They decided to hold the ceremony in the same chapel where they had first been wed, the place where their journey together had begun. They invited their family, their friends, their loyal bannermen, to witness their vow renewal. On the day of the ceremony, the chapel was filled with flowers, with candles, with the sounds of music and laughter. Marjorie, dressed in a gown of white and silver, her hair adorned with flowers, looked radiant, her beauty undiminished by the passage of time. Edmund, though his hair was now streaked with gray and his face lined with the marks of age, stood tall and proud, his eyes shining with love for his wife. They stood before the altar, their hands clasped together, their hearts filled with gratitude and joy. They repeated their vows, their voices strong and clear, their words echoing through the chapel. I, Edmund, take you, Marjorie, to be my wife, my partner, my love, for all the days of my life. I, Marjorie, take you, Edmund, to be my husband, my partner, my love, for all the days of my life. They exchanged rings, symbols of their enduring love, their unbreakable bond. They kissed a long, tender kiss that sealed their commitment, their devotion. The chapel erupted in cheers, in applause, in a celebration of love, of loyalty, of a future filled with hope. Edmund and Marjorie, the wolf and the dove, the fire and the ice, had found their happily ever after, not in a fairy tale, but in the real world, in the harsh and beautiful land of Northwood. Their journey had been a testament to the power of love, of forgiveness, of resilience. They had overcome adversity, defied expectations, and created a legacy that would endure for generations to come. The vow was not just a renewal of their marriage, but a renewal of their commitment to Northwood, to their people, to the ideals of justice, compassion, and unity that they had championed. And as they stood together, hand in hand, they knew that their journey was far from over, but that whatever challenges the future held, they would face them together, united in their love, their purpose. The final chapter was just a promise for the next one, the continuation of their journey. Epilogue. The years that followed the vow renewal were a golden age for Northwood. Thomas, having come of age, assumed the lordship, guided by the wisdom of his parents and the Regency Council. He proved to be a just and capable ruler, carrying on the legacy of his father and mother. Lyra married a neighboring lord, strengthening the alliances of Northwood and bringing further peace to the region. Edmund and Marjorie, though they had relinquished their formal roles in governance, remained active and influential figures in Northwood. They devoted their time to charitable works, to mentoring young people, and to fostering a sense of community and belonging among their people. They often visited the ruined monastery, the site of the parley that had almost cost Marjorie her life. They had rebuilt the monastery, transforming it into a place of healing and learning, a symbol of reconciliation and renewal. They established a library there, filled with books and scrolls from across the kingdom, a testament to their belief in the power of knowledge and understanding. Gareth, having found redemption and purpose in his service to Northwood, became a close friend and confidant to both Edmund and Marjorie. He married and had children of his own, finally finding the family and belonging he had always craved. The scars of the past remained, but they were no longer a source of pain, but a reminder of the transformative power of forgiveness and second chances. As the twilight years of their lives approached, Edmund and Marjorie found solace in each other's company, their love undiminished by the passage of time. They would often sit together in the castle gardens, watching the sunset, reminiscing about their journey together, the challenges they had overcome, the joys they had shared. One evening, as they sat hand in hand, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky, Edmund turned to Marjorie, his eyes filled with a deep and abiding love. "Marjorie," he said, his voice soft and filled with emotion, "you are my life, my love, my everything. You have made me a better man, a better ruler, a better father. You have given me more than I ever deserved." Marjorie, her heart overflowing with love for this man who had captured her heart so many years ago, smiled at him, her eyes glistening with tears. "And you, Edmund," she said, "you have given me a home, a family, a purpose. You have shown me the true meaning of love, of loyalty, of courage. You are my rock, my protector, my soulmate." They embraced, their love a beacon of hope, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. They had faced the storms of life together, and they had emerged stronger, wiser, and more deeply in love than ever before. Edmund passed away peacefully in his sleep, a few months later, with Marjorie by his side. His passing was mourned by all of Northwood, who remembered him as a strong and just ruler, a man who had brought peace and prosperity to their land. Marjorie lived for several more years, continuing to serve as a wise and compassionate advisor to Thomas and a beloved figure to the people of Northwood. She passed away peacefully, surrounded by her family, her heart filled with love and gratitude for the life she had lived, the journey she had shared with Edmund. They were buried together in the chapel, where they had first been wed and later renewed their vows, their tomb a symbol of their enduring love, their unbreakable bond. Their story became a legend, passed down through generations, a tale of a warrior and a lady, of fire and ice, of a love that had conquered all. The North remembered, not just the battles and betrayals, but the love that had bloomed in the midst of them, a love that had transformed a kingdom and inspired generations to come. Their legacy lived on, not just in their children and grandchildren, but in the hearts of all who knew their story, a story of courage, compassion, and the enduring power of love to overcome even the greatest of obstacles.